Good evening and welcome to Garden Hour, brought to you each week at this time. And we welcome you to join us tonight. Uh, Panelists we have tonight are Robin Buterbaugh, our horticulture consumer field specialist. And Robin, what are you going to be chatting with us tonight about?
Well, today I'm going to be talking about a subject that many of you might know that I've been interested in, permaculture and food forests. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the demonstration food forests that we're just going to be starting at McCrory Gardens. So it'll be fun to share some of the new projects that we're doing over there.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
And I always forget to introduce myself. I'm Rhoda Burrows, a horticulture extension specialist based out in Rapid City, but covering the state. And it's our treat to have with us also Sydney Trio, uh, our McCrory Garden Education Coordinator and SDSU Extension Assistant. And she's going to be sharing with us some of what's going on at McCrory. So take it away, Sydney.
All right, well, thanks for having me here. I'm going to get my screen shared. Well, hello, everyone. Like Rhoda said, I'm the Education Coordinator and Extension Horticulture Assistant at McCrory Gardens. Tonight, I'm going to be sharing with you an update on what's all going on at McCrory Gardens. So we'll get to go on a little virtual tour. To start off, this butterfly picture is an Eastern tiger swallowtail, one of my all-time favorites. And I thought this is just a perfect picture to put right there. All right. Also, it is National Pollinator Week. So we just like to celebrate and kind of honor those pollinators. And this is a fun fact from an extension source. About 75% of all flowering plants rely on pollination to produce fruits and seeds. So fun little fact and some pictures. So something that's been going on, we've had some tours. This was a 4-H camp we had the other day, and then we have a few tours coming up. And then we've also had the kindergartners here from the Brookings Great After School Place. So they got to plant some marigolds and radishes the other week. So it's exciting. A little update on the willows. Last time I was on Garden Hour, I talked about how they were coming down. They are estimated to be around 50 years old, so they're just getting towards the end of their age. And you can see at the tops of them, some of the branches are obviously dead. And when it's really windy out, a lot of them fall to the ground, so it's not really safe for people to walk around. So this was a before picture, and then a during. You can see Dr. Pulse in there, and then some of the McCrory crew kind of cleaning up. And then this is kind of sad, but this is what they look like now. It's been so rainy and wet, so we haven't been able to go in and clean up the rest, but it will be cleaned up. And then Chris and the crew took some cuttings of the willows before, and then they propagated them, so we'll essentially be planting the same willows in its spot for the future generations. Last time I also shared the whole process of how we start each plant from seed and then bring it into McCrory Gardens. And right now we are in the process of planting all these annuals and perennials out into the gardens. So I have some pictures. On the left here is the transition bed. We have some plants laid out, ready to be put in the ground. And then on the right is some of the garden crew putting the plants in the logo leaf bed. So been really busy putting all those plants in. Here's some more of the garden crew. They were planting in the rock garden. And then there's this really pretty calla lily here. And then some impatiens and coleus in the shade garden. So it's pretty cool. So now into perennials. This one gets, we get asked a lot what this one is, and it is a clematis, but a bush type, not a vining type. And it will start off like this. This is probably a week ago. The flowers kind of point downwards, and then on the right here afterwards, they'll produce that kind of whirling, fluffy type looking flower. And it always reminds me, if you've ever seen the Lorax, it kind of looks like a truffula tree, and they're super fuzzy and soft. The lilies are just starting to open. So the one on the left was just yesterday when it was raining out, so they're just starting to open, and then this one as well. So I always like lilies, so I'm excited for those to start blooming more. This one is in terrace gardens in the big middle bed. They're foxtail lilies, and they are really, really striking. So those are just starting to flower right now. And then also Japanese tree lilacs. If you've seen them out in the streets, or if you have one in your yard, you'd probably see it blooming right now. This one has been super, super awesome. We have these outside of our straw bale house, and they are flowering like crazy. So this is a fun one to add. The Baptisia has been also flowering. Before, I always thought it was just the purple and the yellow kinds, but I noticed that we had a white false indigo, which is supposedly the most wild type. So that was a cool find in the gardens as well. We have lots and lots of roses flowering. This has probably been the best year that I've ever seen the roses look. So here's some pictures I just captured of them. But they definitely look much prettier in person. So it's pretty cool. Then also in the Annie Hansen garden is the Lillian Gibson rose. So Annie Hansen, I've kind of talked about him before, but he is the USDA's first plant explorer. And he went over to Russia and China and brought back the plants and then bred them with American varieties. And then he's also a professor at SDSU, and he bred over 400 different plants. And he has lots of roses and apples, crab apples, but we have some of them at McCrory Gardens. And the Lillian Gibson rose is named after the former president of SDSU, Briggs, his daughter. So Lillian Gibson was Briggs's daughter. And then the Almada apple, which is supposed to be super red fleshed. So those are some that are growing. Then you might see, if you are walking around, the newly updated cottage, and it also has a new statue. Some of the donors for the statue are honoring their son. And so sometimes Lisa and I were just on a walk the other day and we thought it was a real cat in there, but it's a statue. So the next time you're here, you might see that. And then I was also walking around and found this mock orange. So those smell pretty good and look really pretty too. Then I threw this one on there because it's really, really pretty. It is just about done flowering though, but I just had to add it to show how pretty this lupine was. So we planted the Three Sisters garden. So for those who aren't familiar, Three Sisters is corn, bean, and squash. It's a Native American traditional way of growing these three different plants together. So first we planted the corn on May 29th, and then the picture on the far right is what it currently looks like. So these are the different corn varieties we planted. We got our seeds from Baker Creek heirloom seeds. So just a bunch of different ones. So yeah, now we have to plant the beans next. So if you see this one in your garden, is not good. It is orange hawkweed. It kind of looks cool, but it is very, very invasive. a common name is also fox and cubs, and it has a hairy foliage on the leaves and stems. So if you have this in your garden, you definitely want to get rid of it. And I think this is the last one. It is valerian. So this is growing like crazy right now. It is tall and it smells and it attracts many butterflies, moths, flies. It can get up to 6 feet tall, but the smell is, it kind of smells like baby powder. Some say like moldy cheese or stinky feet. So some people like it though. Personally, not my choice, but it definitely attracts many different butterflies and insects. Speaking of moths, we will be having an event on July 19th from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m., which is a moth walk. And Stephen Robertson, he's also a SDSU Extension Field Specialist. He'll be here giving a presentation, and he is super awesome at all things. He knows a lot about moths. So it's fun to kind of walk through the gardens and go to the different stations and find all the different moths. So that'll be coming up. So if you ever have any questions, you could call me, email me, or if you ever want a tour or come visit the gardens, you can come visit me.
A moth walk. This sounds really fun.
Yes.
We're gonna have to have one on this end of the state too.
Yes.
And I'm trying to understand how something could either smell like baby powder or stinky feet. Quite a range there.
Yeah, it's just very strong.
Usually if something it attracts flies, it's not good smelling.
Yeah.
We had one question which any of us three might want to chime in on, and somebody's wondering what might be turning their rose bush leaves brown. And I think maybe we need a little bit more information of whether this is, is it browning from the edges? Is it the whole leaf? Is it like brown spots on it? Or so maybe whoever put that in can give us a little more information. But meanwhile, Sydney or Robin, have you seen anything in the last week that might? Okay.
Mm-mm.
I know that this time of year we sometimes see the sawfly damage, but
yeah, I know that with all the moisture and some of the temperatures kind of fluctuating, we've been seeing some more issues. And I know our garden hotline assistant is actually writing an article right now about black spot on roses. So that will be coming out shortly, but I'm not sure if that's exactly what we're dealing with here. So there could be
it's mostly from the edges, which maybe it's reacting to our crazy weather lately. Often that means some kind of stress with the roots not taking up enough water. Either not having enough water or having too much water or some disturbance to the roots. But with that, I will turn it over to you, Robin.
Okay. All right. As I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about permaculture design and food forests, although not too much, because I've spoken about it a few different places before, and I'd be happy to talk more in depth about it in the future. So I'll go into just a little bit of background about permaculture and what it is. But then mostly I'm going to talk about food forests and what we're up to at McCrory Gardens. So permaculture is just a combination of the two words permanent and agriculture, or more recently permanent culture. And it's really about looking at patterns found in nature and the relationships found in nature, in ecosystems, and then applying those patterns to a whole systems design on your property, in your home garden, even in your household, your farm, and even more recently, it's being applied to a lot more social systems like businesses, education, organizations. So it's an interesting concept to learn about. You can take a deep dive, and you might not come back because there's a lot to learn about. But really, ultimately, it's about trying to work with nature and not necessarily just imposing our will on nature. And it's really based on a set of ethics and principles. As I mentioned, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but there are 3 main ethics that all of the permaculture designs and permaculture work follows, and that's care for the earth is the number 1, care for people, and then care for the future, or fair share. And then there are 12 different principles that are pretty common sense that help to guide any permaculture design. And those are shown here. And if you're interested, please let me know. You can reach out to me and I can provide you with a lot more information about some of the basics of permaculture. But today I'm going to talk about a food forest. And a food forest is really one of the techniques that can be used in a permaculture design. So whether you're working in your garden, in your yard, or on a larger scale on your farm, a food forest is a really great way to try to maximize the amount of edible or productive crops or different things that you have growing in a potentially smaller amount of space. So you could have a food forest in your backyard. And in fact, you can have a food forest with just one tree. So a food forest isn't necessarily growing an entire forest. It's just mimicking a forest ecosystem. And this ecosystem contains a lot of edible and beneficial plants, and it has them all at different layers. So the components of a food forest are usually a canopy tree that can be a large fruit or a nut tree, but depending on space, sometimes that is not included in a new permaculture design. And so often you will find a permaculture food forest made up of just the lower tree layer, which would be fruit trees or dwarf fruit trees. Below that is a bush and a shrub layer. You can be growing berries or other things, an herbaceous layer. And so that just means plants that don't have a woody stem. That could be herbs, it could be flowers, it could be even annual vegetables. The 5th layer is root crops. So you could have carrots, you could have potatoes. Then there's a vertical layer that would vine up the trees potentially. That could be something like, I'll talk about it a little bit, scarlet runner beans or hardy kiwi. And then more often, people are really including the fungus layer as well. So whether that's including mushroom plugs in dead logs or just talking about really supporting that mycorrhizal network underneath the soil. And so the goal of a food forest type planting is really to have all of these trees and shrubs and plants that you have planted together be able to have different characteristics and functions so that they work synergistically together. They kind of help support each other in an ecosystem. And so that's really, really the gist of why you're planting in a food forest. It's really to maintain, productivity, but also the ecological benefits in potentially a more compact space. And food forests really hinge on polyculture. Polyculture just means many plants or multiple plants, and that is all about diversity. And so the diversity principle is that the more organisms that you have in an ecosystem, the greater resilience that system has, whether it's to pests, to diseases, or to other pressures within that system. So it's kind of hedging your bets. So, if you're doing diversified agriculture, it's making sure that you don't rely on just one crop. You have multiple things going on. You might have animals. Well, in a food forest, you just have multiple types of plants, multiple layers of plants so that they can provide protection for each other and help to support each other in a variety of different ways. So what are the benefits of starting a food forest? Well, first of all, it provides food, fiber, and medicine, or whatever it is that you're interested in. Provides habitat for animals, insects, and birds at the same time. It can also foster community if you design it as a community forest garden. There's a lot of community gardens out there that include a food forest, but you certainly can have a miniature food forest on your own property. I have a really tiny yard, and I have 6 fruit trees in my yard that I'm doing plantings around. So you can go either way, whether you want to work on a community food forest or just in your own backyard. And food forests really can help to sequester carbon in the soil by growing a diverse number of plants. So those polycultures really help benefit the soil structure, and that soil structure with many different types of roots, many different kinds of roots, really provides a habitat that a good, strong microbial community might need. And that microbial community is what's going to help cycle nutrients and ultimately carbon as well, and increase your organic matter. And it also can help with the water management. Having a diverse number of crops with different roots means that you're covering the soil. And if you're mulching it as well, then you're reducing evaporation. So it can be a good way to help conserve water on your property. As I mentioned, they really can help maximize the productive space in our yards and communities. You're kind of just like packing all kinds of things in there at multiple layers, but you're making sure to do so in a way that's not going to exhaust the soil. It's going to be having a number of different plants that will be nitrogen fixers or mulch or all of these different components that I'm going to talk about, so that it actually in time will potentially require less maintenance once all of these perennials have grown in, and be productive without needing a lot of inputs. And with that, of course, the less lawn that you have to mow and to water means you're using less resources overall from the outside. And you can really grow an interesting variety of foods and fruits that are nutritionally rich, things that you don't necessarily find at the grocery store. That really helps add a lot of diversity to the diet. I don't know the number right off the top of my head, but it was kind of staggering to know that the amount of food, that like 90% of the food we eat comes from maybe like 10 different food like group families, like corn and soybeans and things like that. So really, the more diversity of foods that we can be consuming also helps our own bodies to stay healthy as well. And permaculture food forests can help increase community resilience and add to the local food system as well. The more people that know how to grow food and maybe share food with their neighbors or work on a community food forest just means that more people have food available in communities in case of hardship or natural disaster. We can kind of, as I mentioned, it's a good way to hedge your bets and distribute out the food that's growing. So the different components of a food forest, as I mentioned, the polyculture is the main aspect of a food forest, and they're often called guilds. So the main tree would be your guild tree, and then it has a grouping of low maintenance perennial plants around that one, or it could be several trees. So when you're trying to design or think about the plants that you want in a food forest, you really want to have some redundancy both in the plants themselves, so that each plant has multiple functions. So for example, if you have comfrey, that is a plant that has kind of big leaves, and it's really good for chopping those leaves off and using as mulch. It can be used as a medicinal, and it's also a good pollinator because bumblebees really love the tubular flower structure. So that one plant has 3 different functions within a food forest. Same with, I know it might sound crazy, but a lot of people have stinging nettles in their food forest because they're very nutritious, they're medicinal, they can be good for as an addition to compost or for making compost tea. And so, yeah, they're edible. There's a lot of things that stinging nettles can provide, and most people probably aren't going to go out and plant it intentionally, but you never know. And then each function is performed by multiple plants. So you don't want the nitrogen fixing only one plant. You want multiple plants that can fix nitrogen to really help to provide that natural fertility. You don't want just one plant that's going to attract pollinators. You want several plants that can attract pollinators. And same with drawing in beneficial insects, or acting as a repellent or a ground cover or producing mulch. You're really trying to increase those functions. It's called stacking functions usually in permaculture. So when you're designing a polyculture, it's really viewed in three parts: function, space, and time. So the main functions, the main functional elements that are found in a food forest are, of course, your edible food or your product. Maybe you're wanting to um, make your own dyes for natural fibers, or maybe you want to have your own herb or medicinal herb garden, or fruit. Whatever your goal is, you can kind of make that be the primary function of your main tree or shrubs or trees. But then also it's really important to have plants that are good for pollinators and drawing in beneficial insects. It's good to have plants that will repel pests, whether that's directly, or sometimes different plants, well, not 100%. Alliums are a good one for helping to repel some rabbit and deer pressure. Of course, you want to have nitrogen fixers because that's what's really going to help keep that fertility coming. Plants like comfrey or stinging nettles that are really high in nutrients that you can use as mulch as well to help kind of provide those extra nutrients. And then even plants that repel grass and weeds. A lot of times, in your gardens, grass keeps encroaching, and there are some different plants that are good for planting around the outside that can help prevent some of that grass from encroaching in. And then, of course, space. The forest layers are vertical layers, but you do want to consider the width of the different plants, or the mature width, the type of like habit or form those plants have, whether it's an upright form like corn, or let's see, maybe a dill, and then also what kind of root structure it has, so that you don't have competition. Really the goal, as I said here, is just to maximize the cooperation between plants and minimize competition. So it does take a little bit of research, but that can be the fun of it. And one of the permaculture principles is to just go slow. Don't make drastic changes. Just kind of start with a tree, start with a few plants around it. You can always add more. And then the third part of your polyculture is going to be time. So whether that's pioneer plants that you plant initially to help prepare the soil, whether that, similar to cover crops, whether it's self-sowing plants, making sure that you have seasonal blooms for pollinators. So kind of thinking both over the course of one season and then potentially even multiple seasons or years. I'll just show a couple pictures here of one of the most local food forests that we have. This is a community food forest in Laverne, Minnesota, called Prairie Ally. I would really encourage you, if you're driving by, to check it out. It's pretty cool. It's about 5 acres, and it's a community food forest. So anyone from the community is free to come and pick, and of course, volunteer and help too. They always need a few extra hands, but even if you're not able to volunteer, they welcome people to come in and pick all of the produce that's available. Here's just another picture. I really like, they have these little planting spaces with art or sculptures and seating areas. So it's just kind of it's a cool place to go check out. So I'll get into our upcoming food forest here at McCrory Gardens. If you're familiar with the gardens, this food forest is going to be created just east of the strawbell house and the vegetable garden. And so there are already trees planted there. There are 2 apple trees already and 3 pear trees. One of our pear trees is not looking exceptionally well, and I see there's another tree over here that's a little bit slanted, but we're going to work with what we've got because it's just going to be kind of a fun experiment. So the goal, not just to just plant a food forest, but as a scientist, I'm interested in learning about all of these things that are supposed to be happening. Like, are they actually happening? Are we really seeing more nutrients in these polyculture plantings? How is the soil structure? So I designed a little comparison here between different treatments. So we have 2 apples and 3 pears. The pear in the middle is going to have no plants around it. And then the apple and the pear directly on either side of that are going to have our food forest plants planted just directly into the grass without cardboard or mulch. And then the ones on the end are going to have cardboard and then mulch to suppress the grass. And then we're going to plant the polyculture plants in there. And each tree, except for the one that has no plants, the one that says no treatment, are going to have the exact same plants and number of plants, so that we will have a better comparison. So here are a few of the plants that we have chosen. Don't expect everybody to like fully read this table, but if you notice that we have the common name, the scientific name, the form, so we have the trees are already there, but then we're going to have 2 shrubs around each tree, several different herbaceous type plants, a few different ground covers, and a couple different vines, and then some bulbs, and those bulbs can help deter some rodents sometimes. And then it shows here on the right what types of functions they have. So whether they're nitrogen fixing, whether it's just edible, whether it's good for mulch or pollinators, etc. So as I mentioned, it's really good to have all of these different functions like medicinals or nitrogen fixers in place with a number of different plants, or at least a couple of different plants. So here is just a picture of some of those plants that I had listed. I don't have every single one of them, but the apple or the pear is the center, and then around it you want to have the nitrogen fixer fairly close. And in food forest designs, often there should be one main nitrogen fixer for every 2 fruit trees. And then the other shrub that we have, or I guess the shrub that we have, is New Jersey tea, and that is our nitrogen fixer, or one of them anyway, and that is actually one of our native shrubs. For another one of our shrubs, we have honeyberries. They're similar to blueberries, but they grow better in our climate. They grow better in our alkaline soil, and they're hardy down to zone like even 2 or 3. So they grow really well here. And then we have anise hyssop as a pollinator attractant plant and potentially edible and medicinal. We have nodding onion, that's an allium, and that's good as a deterrent. Creeping thyme is obviously edible. It can attract some pollinators, and it's a good ground cover that kind of helps to spread around the edges and repel some of the grass. Dill is being used as kind of edible, obviously, and then potentially a host plant for the swallowtail butterflies. Strawberry is a good ground cover. That's also edible. Calendula is just a pretty flower. It's just like sunshine, and it is edible and medicinal. And comfrey is another one that I mentioned as having multiple benefits. And then over on the right, we've got nasturtiums. They're a good ground cover, or you can get the vining variety. Chamomile, and then scarlet runner beans is another nitrogen fixer. And we may actually seed some clover in there as well, just to provide additional nitrogen fixing. So what we're going to be doing, at least initially, because the trees are already established, some of them are producing fruit, some of them aren't. We're not necessarily going to be looking at the productivity of the fruit trees at this point, but we are going to be primarily looking at a soil analysis. So I've sent some soil samples off for a soil health assessment, looking at some of the basics that you would be interested in: the nutrient levels, organic matter, carbon, the water holding capacity. That's just what it sounds like. It's how well does the soil hold on to water. Water infiltration and bulk density. We will be doing water infiltration, just shows like how much water sinks into the soil in a defined amount of time, and that can give you an indication of the type of soil that you have, whether it's sandy, silty, or clayey, and also the soil structure and ultimately the soil health. And then what I'm really curious about is to see the results for the PLFA analysis. So we've already sent the soil in, but unfortunately we didn't get the results back in time for me to share them at this moment. But the PLFA is actually looking at the phospholipid fatty acid of the microbial community in the soil. And it will be able to tell us a good indication of the microbial biomass in the soil, and also identify different functional groups of organisms in the soil. So gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria, anaerobic bacteria, and even the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. And so I'm really interested to see the difference in, a tree with no treatment, no plants around it, versus one that might have just the plants around it, versus the one that has the mulch and the cardboard, and really kind of providing that grass suppression and an even better way of absorbing water into the soil, reducing evaporation, and kind of allowing that soil to really form a good structure. I've done a lot of sheet mulching with cardboard and wood chips or wood mulch. And really after just a season, if you pull back that cardboard, it's just full of worms, and it's just very rich and kind of dark and very easy to work soil. So that's an indication of what's happening with the microbial community. So yeah, looking at nitrogen, looking at nutrients, looking at carbon, organic matter, and the microbial communities over time. So we've taken a baseline sample, and then probably in another year, a couple of years, we'll take some additional soil samples from each of those different treatments under the trees. So I'll be really looking forward to sharing those results with you, because I think it's really important, especially with permaculture. Sometimes it gets a reputation as being more, on the fringes of science, but there's a lot of also anecdotal and real evidence showing that something is working. So what I'm interested in doing is seeing, even if it's just on a very small scale, what's happening in the soil under these trees, and then hopefully being able to expand that into some further demonstration and food forest sites as well. So just kind of to sum up a little bit about permaculture design and food forests. Really, traditional gardening is about what we get. We think about our gardens, we're like, oh, I want to plant this, and I want to harvest tomatoes, and I want peppers. But in permaculture design, it's all about finding ways to work within nature, to kind of like see ourselves as part of that natural system and find ways that we can give back. So giving back in this case is planting a food forest, little mini ecosystem that is providing habitat, that's providing nutrients, and really also providing us with what we need as well. So I have here, why use permaculture design and why do food forests? As I mentioned, build productive ecosystems. We can sequester more carbon using perennial plants and polycultures. It's really providing habitat, food, helping with water management, increasing the overall biodiversity, and really kind of conserving resources, closing those loops. So instead of just having kind of linear systems where we're bringing in all these inputs and then we're exporting them all in our trash, we're trying to reuse and trying to have these functioning systems in our own backyards. And really, it's all about growing food we can share with our neighbors, and we can build resilient communities. Have my photo credit resources. My contact information is best by email, robin.buterbaugh@sdstate.edu. And with that, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
We do have some questions in the Q&A box. One of them is, what are the plants that repel grass and weeds? I'm sure we all want to know that.
Yeah. Some of those spreading herbs like thyme, oregano, those, I mean, they're not probably going to be ever 100%, but some of those planted fairly densely around the edges can do a fairly good job. There's some other plants like the comfrey does a pretty good job of repelling grass. It just forms this huge kind of leaf structure, and underneath it really suppresses growth of most of the other plants. Things like Jerusalem artichokes, they're a bit taller, but those also can suppress some grass. There's a concept called fortress planting in one of the permaculture books that I have. It's Beauty and Abundance by Mike Hogue, and he actually lists some of those fortress plants that are good for repelling grass.
I can attest that the thyme can pretty much take over a place if it wants to.
Yep. Well, and I suppose you could try, mint would work too, but I don't know that you actually would want to plant that on its own in the ground.
As aggressive as mint. So
yeah, I mean, there can be such, too much of a good thing.
Well, weed whip can take care of a lot of it.
Yep. Clover, my neighbor has really densely planted clover in her yard. And I know Dr. Lang has done some research with clover as a kind of living mulch or cover crop, and did find a little bit of productivity, decrease. I think that's correct, Rhoda, a little bit of drop in production with the vegetables, but you can still have clover, and it's doing a pretty good job next door of repelling the grass. So
Right.
If you're not concerned about like having the most productive vegetable ever, then clover might be a good one as well.
And one of the questions that I don't believe has been answered quite yet is whether clover just competes that first year, because you don't get a lot of nitrogen back that first year. So maybe in the second year it evens out some. We'll have the answer to that by the end of this year, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll definitely look forward to that.
Second question, what was the name of the berry that is better than blueberries for South Dakota?
Honeyberry. It's in the honeysuckle family, Lonicera, but it's called a honeyberry. I've been looking for them around, and there's not that many available at the garden centers around here, but you can find them online pretty easily if you type it into Google. So
I think we have quite a few out here in Rapid.
okay.
So they've been more available. I have 4 or 5, and I have found out that the deer do enjoy the bushes. So
Yes,
I'm
they
going to have to
probably
fence
do.
mine off.
Yeah, might need a little bit of protection the first little bit. They can get, maybe 5 or so feet tall, but I mean, it takes a while. So they're pretty well behaved for quite a while.
Yeah. Are you concerned about the chemicals from the decomposing cardboard?
Actually, I've been thinking about doing a garden hour episode about that. I'm not worried about, as long as you're using plain brown cardboard without a lot of tape or stickers or glue. I've read some, just like very fear-mongering articles about how horrible cardboard could be, and I did read the original paper that talked about like PFAS chemicals potentially in cardboard over in Europe. Um, I've also read some pretty in-depth articles about why cardboard isn't bad. So, I mean, at this point, I think that it's up to your own discretion and how you feel about it. In my mind, there's so many things around us already that we're probably exposed to, and including our, you know, our takeout containers. Like there's so much everything in everything. So frankly, I have had great luck with cardboard, and I'm not worried enough about cardboard at this point, based on the research that I've done to stop using it.
It seems like it's the coating, waterproof coating on cardboard or your takeout that contains the PFAS or PFOS or those
Yeah.
chemicals. So if it's just straight old fashioned cardboard, it's much less of a hazard.
Yep.
And somebody writes in to say that they bought honeyberries or haskaps is another name for them from Lewis Drug in Sioux Falls.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I actually just ordered the ones for McCrory online, but
Yeah.
I did do some searching at some of the like online looking at the department or like the home stores to see if I could find any, and I didn't see them, but I didn't look there. So
Another one I like for food forests, if you're in a shady layer, is the elderberries. And I think you had a picture of those.
yeah, I love elderberries. I think we're going to add elderberries, but not necessarily right under the trees because they do get fairly large. So in that area along the kind of border from where the vegetable garden is to where it transitions into that shady walkway to the south would be a good spot for elderberries, but they just probably would be too large to plant in the guild right directly under those trees at this point. So.
All right. I think that's it for the questions.
All right.
I'm looking forward to seeing how the example at McCrory looks in a few years. It certainly is a lot more inviting than just plain mowed lawn, which we see in
It's
a
like
lot of our
why have all
community
this grass
spaces.
everywhere? We can do more with it. We can kind of have some fun and do some experiments.
Okay, we will continue with some information on that I've been hearing in the last day or two. And it seems a little odd after having been almost 100 degrees here just a few days ago. We're now talking about in the west part of the state down to 40 tonight in Rapid, down to 35, 37 in some of the surrounding areas. So one of the questions now is, will the cold hurt my whatever it might be? But peppers are one of the most sensitive to cold. They will show chilling injury below 40 degrees, but they may drop flowers below 60 degrees at night. So this is why our peppers are just kind of sitting there with the cooler temperatures we've had this spring, and why it can take them a while to get going. Any of those warm season crops tend to at least not have growth below about 50 degrees, and may show some chilling injury below that. One of the things I've seen recently in some of the questions that come to us are a bean plant that came up, and chilling injury can look sometimes very similar to sunburn. So it just kind of wipes out some of the chlorophyll in the leaves. So you may have big brown blotches. And often it'll be the most exposed part of the plant. So it might be the higher leaves. Our ground temperatures are fairly warm, so that should help us a lot. If you're in one of those outline areas, you may want to get out those blankets or buckets or whatever you have to kind of protect the plants from the cool air and hopefully catch some of that heat coming out of the ground. As far as individual cultivars, there can be some difference in cold tolerance. And I was trying to find some lists and didn't find a whole lot, just a lot of reference to these cultivars, that there are differences between cultivars, and the lists that I found were a little bit more dated, but some of these are still around. Ace, Hero, Maribel, some of these were listed as being more cold tolerant. When you look at vegetable cultivar descriptions, usually it's online or in your catalogs where they'll talk about this may be more cold tolerant. It is a little difficult to track that down some, but the other thing that can be useful is to graft into a hardier rootstock, and that may actually help the cold tolerance, not just of peppers, but of things like cucumbers and some of those other more or less cold tolerant varieties. Cucumbers are another one. The picture here just shows this wasn't actually frost, it's chilling damage. And so you don't see the blackening or browning, at least right away, that you might see with frost, but chilling damage, you'll get some wilting, and then you'll probably see some dieback on part of the leaves as it warms back up. They often wilt because under cold temperatures, the roots have a hard time taking up water, and the plant has a hard time transporting it. So, yeah, if you're listening and you're out in the western part of the state and have some of these planted out there, you might want to go out and see what you can do to protect them a little bit. There was a request a couple weeks ago about talking more about raspberries, so we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. There are two main kinds of raspberries that we have available, and that's one is the summer fruiting or floricane, and that's kind of your traditional raspberries. These were ones that have been developed over decades or even hundreds of years, but these generally fruit in July. The canes have to go through winter before fruiting. So with raspberries or brambles, we have a cane that grows up from the plant in the spring, and it will just have leaves on that first year, but it is developing little tiny buds inside that you can't see. that then once it goes through winter, will go ahead and develop into flowers and fruit. These are all red berries, or they can be kind of purplish. And then the canes die after fruiting. So long about July, August, you may be concerned that all your raspberries are dying. Well, the canes that have fruited will die after fruiting. And then we have fall fruiting, or primal cane raspberries. And these are ones that have just been developed in the last couple of decades. And here, the cane doesn't have to go through the winter before the flower and fruit develop. So it can be first year cane. And therefore, they're going to fruit in late August to September, depending on the variety. And for our climate, I recommend looking for the earlier fruiting ones of the primal cane. If you leave that cane over winter, you may get some more fruit that following July, but then it should be taken off. Or we'll talk about that in a minute. So they fruit on the current year's growth. These can be red or yellow berries. As far as I know, we still don't have any yellow summer fruiting berries. So if you have yellow berries, that means you've got the primal cane type. Okay, so talking about pruning them, for summer fruiting, we go in and we take out any of the dead canes, of course, and then you want to thin it down to just 6 to 8 canes per square foot. So you want to have 3-4 inches between each cane. Remember, they get thick with leaves on as they grow. And any spindling growth, go ahead and cut back. You'll be doing this in dormant season. You know, February, March, when we get really nice days, is a great time to do this. Now, the fall fruiting, you can treat the same as the summer fruiting, or you can cut everything back to 1 or 2 inches. If you do that, you won't get any fruit in July. You'll just get the fall fruit, but usually that's okay anyway. Just a note about fertilizing. First of all, if you're planting raspberries, put it in well-drained soil, but they do like high organic matter, at least 3 to 4% organic matter. And a lot of our gardens, if you've been adding compost and mulch, will be at that stage. You don't want to put any fertilizer in that planting. That's true for most of our woody crops. A few weeks later, if your soil test has shown a need for it, you can add 2 to 3 tablespoons per plant of lawn fertilizer that's high in nitrogen. Just make sure it doesn't have any weed killer in it. Or ammonium sulfate is another great fertilizer if you have high soil pH, because that'll help adjust the soil a little bit. Then in subsequent years, you can fertilize before the new growth starts in the spring. And then you can do another application after the flower buds break for the summer fruiting types, or in early August for fall fruiting. A lot to keep track of there, but this is an image that I ran across recently, and this is Honeycrisp apple. And Honeycrisp is kind of it likes to be babied a little bit. It has some issues with it doesn't like to dry out too much. It doesn't like wet feet. You kind of have to baby Honeycrisp a little bit, but it can get these sort of off colored leaves where you have some mottling. The inside of the leaf is quite dark, but it's not just the veins, so is not like an iron chlorosis. But if you see that, don't worry about it too much. That's Honeycrisp, bean Honeycrisp. So just thought I'd show that. And then a reminder that our garden hotlines are open and available for you to call in or to email. And you can email photos are great help in identifying a lot of these at any of these 4 locations. And if you need to bring a plant in, you can call ahead and find out when would be a good time to do that. And I'll stop our share there and see if we have any more. Would chilling injury affect what happened to the iris this spring? It might be. Iris are generally pretty cold tolerant, but I know we got down very cold fairly early in the season, down into the 20s, lower 20s, and you might see some dieback with that. Did you see any dieback with that at McCrory?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. If you have any more specific description of what happened to the iris this spring, let me know. I'm making some guesses about what that might have been, and if that's not, I think I've got all the. Notice we've got the garden hotline in the chat box, so if you have miss writing down the the location right away, or you can go to extension.sdstate.edu and click on the garden and problems and solutions. With that, thank you for attending. Have a good evening, and I look forward to seeing pictures of your food forest in a few years.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out too.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.